Once the park's most popular ride, this unique and fast-paced racing wooden coaster was lost to time, and is now just a memory. So whatever happened to it, and why were its successors so unsuccessful? So let's dive in and learn the story of Rolling Thunder at Six Flags Great Adventure. Before I start, I just wanted to thank Great Adventure History for providing a lot of these photos that I'm going to be using throughout the video, and also for just existing and documenting the entire park's history and having so many cool photos. If you haven't done so already, I highly recommend you guys go check out that website. It's definitely one of my favorite websites. You can scroll on there for hours. There's so much cool information and really a lot of cool photos. In 1974, Great Adventure opened its doors as a brand new theme park located in Jackson, New Jersey. This was a fairly large park thought up by New York entrepreneur Warner Leroy. The park quickly gained immense popularity and took crowds larger than it could handle. So once the park closed for the season, they immediately started upgrading infrastructure throughout the park, along with adding many new rides to handle the crowds at the park. Great Adventure was built 90 minutes in between two of the largest cities in the country, New York City and Philadelphia. The park, of course, also drew from the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York suburbs, along with smaller cities in the area like Newark, Trenton, Jersey City, and Wilmington, Delaware. However, the park also had a draw to larger cities farther away, like Boston, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. So to say, yeah, they definitely drew a lot of crowds. Warner Leroy quickly lost interest in running the park like a business for a multitude of factors, but pretty much how popular it became and how much work it needed was definitely the main reason. The park was put up for sale only 2 years after its creation and was quickly picked up by the growing Six Flags Corporation in 1977. The company immediately started adding high-capacity thrill rides and coasters, the first of which being Lightning Loops, opening in 1977, a ride I plan to cover later in this series. With the huge success of that ride, the park wanted to go even bigger and better. They immediately started to draw up a plan for a large wooden coaster to go in an entire new area of the park. At this point, Philadelphia Toboggan Coasters, or PTC, was the predominant wooden coaster builder at the time, with the mastermind John Allen designing most of them. However, in PTC's later years, William Cobb and Don Rosser were assisting in these projects. PTC's last coaster, Screaming Eagle, opened in 1976, just a year or so before the planning of this large wooden coaster. Although it is not confirmed, I'm going to assume that John retired from designing roller coasters after Screaming Eagle, since he already stepped down from being the president of PTC in 1971, so Great Adventure went with William Cobb and Don Rosser as the designers of the ride. Starting in late 1978, the park began to clear land and trees on what was previously the park's entrance, tram circle, part of the parking lot, and undeveloped woodlands at the front of the park, really showing how large this ride was going to be. However, Great Adventure has always taken care to remove as little trees as possible throughout its entire life, and to this day, a lot of the trees still remain inside of the park, giving the park quite a unique wooded and shaded feel that really other places don't have. This could be due to the state of New Jersey and Jackson Township being pretty strict about tree removal, but in my opinion, it's definitely not a bad thing. Due to this, Rolling Thunder's area was not completely cleared of trees, and the park kept as many as possible, giving it a nice setting out in the woods in the front of the park, making for great night rides. Construction began in the fall of 1978 and continued throughout early 1979. The ride was built by various carpenters from the Frontier Construction Company, a construction company from Teaneck, New Jersey. While this was happening, the park was also beginning work on the new area surrounding Rolling Thunder, Hernando's Hideaway, which was a Spanish-themed section. The area had Spanish-inspired architecture, and Rolling Thunder was given a Wild West sort of look throughout the years, tying into the actual Western-themed section next door, Best of the West, previously known as Rootin' Tootin' Rip Roarin'. What kind of This area still exists today under the much better name of Frontier Adventures and houses some of the park's original rides like the Log Flume and Runaway Mine Train. As Rolling Thunder's construction continued throughout early 1979, the ride station and brake run were built. The station's roof extended over the ride's brake run since it used skid brakes. Rather than pinch brakes, which are seen on most modern rides and simply pinch a fin on the bottom of the train to stop it, these brakes simply pushed up on the train to stop it, and used the friction that way. These were pretty affected by rain and moisture, so the roof over the brake run was built in order for it to be able to run in the rain and not either overshoot the station or collide into the train. The ride was formally announced on March 1st, 1979, with a large press release and promotional material being put out.
After you've been struck by lightning loops, there's still the fury of rolling thunder.
Six Flags actually went to Kings Island to film promotional material on the commercial on Racer, their PTC wooden coaster. The PTC trains are easily taken apart, so they took off the front piece and put one with a Great Adventure logo on it. So to the untrained eye, this would actually kind of look like Rolling Thunder. Obviously at the time, a bunch of animation software didn't exist yet, so this was a great and easy way to get promotional material out. Despite it arguably being less intense than Lightning Loops, the park's double arrow shuttle loop installed the year prior, this was marketed as the big bad scary coaster for the park. At the end of its construction, Rolling Thunder only cost about $5 million, or in today's money, just over $23 million, which is crazy expensive for a wooden coaster. However, this was technically two different coasters, so it makes more sense. However, Rolling Thunder was actually part of a $10 million expansion project in order to accommodate the park's growing crowds, which would be around $46.2 million today, just accounting for inflation of course. The park was also installing a Schwarzkopf Enterprise, 4 new rides in the Kitty Kingdom, a petting zoo, and a haunted walkthrough attraction, which was the infamous Haunted Castle across the moat. Great Adventures Wild Safari also opened up a new Australia section, and both parks made general improvement to their infrastructure too. It was announced that all of this would be ready for April 7th, 1979, the park's opening day, except Rolling Thunder. Unfortunately, it would not be open until June 6th, presumably simply because of how huge the ride was, and New Jersey winters can be pretty brutal. Rolling Thunder was built on the tail end of the roller coaster renaissance of the 1970s, which, funnily enough, was actually kickstarted by Kings Island Racer, the ride used in the promotional material as mentioned before. The park claimed that Rolling Thunder was the first traditional wooden coaster built in the Northeast in more than 3 decades, and it was certainly absolutely massive for its time. The ride featured a max height of 96 feet, a top speed of 56 miles an hour, and a length of 3,200 feet, totaling in 6,400 feet of total track between both sides. Rolling Thunder featured 5-car, 3-bench PTC trains, which were heavily advertised for their comfort and safety due to the double locking lap bar, which were controlled automatically and manually by the ride's control system and ride operators. It's strange to see that this was advertised so heavily, as pretty much every other wooden coaster at the time had these exact same trains. However, maybe they were something different in terms of they were controlled by the computer or something else. The park also claimed that Rolling Thunder would have an insane capacity of 2,400 people per hour, or 1,200 on each side. The park loved building 2 of something to boost capacity if the ride on its own could not handle the crowds. For example, there were 2 Lightning Loops tracks to boost capacity. The park ended up building a second log flume due to the first one's popularity. They built 2 Ferris wheels, one being smaller than the other and offering different views. And then later in the 1990s, Batman and Robin the Chiller opened with 2 tracks just to boost capacity. Honestly though, it was warranted, as the park just saw a record level of attendance just the season prior, with over 3 million guests. Rolling Thunder opened to much fanfare from both locals and coaster enthusiasts at the time. The ride was fast, featured a handful of airtime moments, but the racing aspect was what everyone really loved. While it wasn't breaking any records, as the Beast at Kings Island opened on the same year, and it took the record for tallest, fastest, and longest coaster, Rolling Thunder was a massive coaster for the time. Anything around 100 feet, which it was 4 feet shy of, essentially looked like a giga coaster nowadays. Plus that, the ride was fairly long, and regardless of its less intense, drawn-out elements, the dense wooden structure made the ride seem a lot more intimidating than it actually was. Rolling Thunder didn't do as much for attendance as Lightning Loops did, but the park did see a 9% increase in attendance in 1979, with a total of 3.4 million visitors. The constant aggressive expansion of the park with these large and fairly unique rides for the area caused the park to quickly have over 3 million visitors every season, and the 1979 season was one of the most attended seasons at Six Flags Great Adventure in its entire history. Unfortunately, after just 2 seasons of operation, an accident occurred during the early hours before the park was open to the public. On August 16, 1981, a 20-year-old man was thrown from the coaster and was reportedly a park employee. There are quite a few different stories, and the most common one is that this happened during a morning test ride. However, this Asbury Park Press article, which is the local newspaper of Ocean and Monmouth County, where Great Adventure is located, states this happened at 10:50 p.m. If this Asbury Park Press article is correct, there's a good chance it could have been an employee's ride night, or possibly employees off the clock just enjoying the ride after their shift. Now, with that being said, the employees allegedly assumed an unauthorized riding position according to a state inspector, and that the riders were not making use of the lap bar according to a park spokesperson. I don't exactly remember where I heard this story from, but I've heard it multiple times, so I'm going to include it in the video. Allegedly, Rolling Thunder's employees would play a game where they would start in the back row at the beginning of the ride and have to make their way to the front row before the end of the ride, and if they made it, they would win the game. However, during one of the ride's turns and strong lateral moments, the rider was ejected from the ride and unfortunately passed away from his injuries. However, Rolling Thunder continued to safely thrill guests throughout the 1980s, but not without a few changes. The most significant change was probably the removal of the last car to each train, making it from 5 cars to 4 cars, reducing the capacity to 24 riders per train, and theoretically lowering the ride's maximum throughput to 960 people per hour, or 1,920 people per hour when both sides would run. While this was a major decrease, when both sides were running, this was still easily a capacity monster. I can only imagine the 5th car was removed due to excessive wear on the track, and making the train lighter would reduce maintenance costs, of course. The next modification was the addition of black headrests seen on some wooden coasters at the time. This was also around when seat dividers were installed on the trains too, in order to prevent riders from sliding around or slamming into each other during the ride's strong lateral moments, especially on the right side track. At this time, seatbelts were also added as an additional restraint, and surprisingly the ride's single position lap bars, or known as PTC's buzz bars, were kept around for the entirety of the ride's life. The next significant change came in 1984 when it's just Rolling Thunder backwards. The ride's left track had modified trains put in place to have riders run backwards throughout the layout. Allegedly, it was extremely uncomfortable since the ride was starting to get a bit rough, and the left side returned to normal in 1985. The next year, in 1986, Rolling Thunder received a new neighbor with Ultra Twister, the world's first Togo Ultra Twister. The surrounding area also began to change, with a large path and bridge now connecting the back areas of Best of the West and Hernando's Hideaway. Unfortunately, this cleared a lot of the trees around the Rolling Thunder, making the ride appear smaller and less thrilling. And also, not to mention, there was a brand new thrilling steel coaster next to it that was super modern looking, also kind of making Rolling Thunder look old and unappealing. This was also happening during the years when the park was really down on attendance due to accidents and an unsafe reputation due to the park's clientele. The park was also appearing a bit more run down, basically because of those reasons. However, while the park started to see better attendance during 1989 and a better look, Ultra Twister was removed, leaving a massive awkward hole in Hernando's Hideaway and making Rolling Thunder look even less appealing. However, it was still one of the park's most popular rides, since the only other major thrill coasters at the time were the brand new Great American Scream Machine and what was left of Lightning Loops. In 1995, Rolling Thunder received a new neighbor with Viper, the prototype Togo Mega Coaster. This made the area look way better, as Viper had elaborate ghost town theming and a stucco-built Spanish Mission station. Rolling Thunder continued to be one of the most popular coasters in the park, especially since its new neighbor had extremely negative reviews of being painful and a rough ride. 2002 came along, opening up more views of Rolling Thunder with the short-lived Season Pass entrance. This was placed next to the ride's final turn and led into the same area of the park that was previously Kiddie Kingdom. In 2003, more cosmetic changes came to the area, with Rolling Thunder getting a desperately needed fresh coat of white paint, and it looked really, really good. Especially with the Season Pass entrance being right there, it needed to look good. However, on Rolling Thunder's left side, what was previously a parking lot and pass holder entrance turned into the Golden Kingdom in 2005. This was the all-new area housing King Dakar, the world's tallest and fastest coaster, standing at 456 feet tall and reaching a top speed of 128 miles an hour. This made what was once an intimidating, intense wooden coaster look like a puny children's ride. Even Ka's Bunny Hill was over 30 feet taller than Rolling Thunder. While Ka was being added on the left side, the right side also saw the demolition of Viper during the 2005 season, and the start of construction for El Toro, America's first and only Intamin prefab wooden coaster to open in 2006. This essentially completely hid Rolling Thunder from the skyline. However, these two coasters ended up performing the tango with each other, as El Toro was specifically designed to cross over Rolling Thunder and spend the second half of the layout on the infield of Rolling Thunder. The entire area was freshened up and rethemed to Plaza del Carnaval, with the addition of tango, plaza games, and changing some of the restaurants in the area. Despite Rolling Thunder being dwarfed by Con Toro, it continued to be a popular and highly ridden ride in the park. It was now seen as a family coaster since it had a super low height requirement and wasn't seen as intense as some of the other rides with a shorter height requirement, while also being larger than rides like Skull Mountain or the Runaway Mine Train. This allowed many young kids to have their first rides on a first big coaster per se. I ended up getting my first rides on Rolling Thunder in 2012 and rode it for pretty much every single visit after that. The experience started with walking under the newer sign from when El Toro was built into a sea of switchbacks for the queue. Great Adventure loved building these giant switchbacks at the back of their lines in the 70s and 80s. Mine Train, Log Flume, Giant Wheel, Skyway, and many others all had these queues on concrete slabs. You would have to choose your side pretty much right away at the entrance, either left or right. At the end of the switchbacks, you would walk up the station, which looked fairly nice. It was built out of wood and had sort of a western look to it. The cool thing was, on the left side, you would walk under the brake run and into the ride's infield and get some great views of not only the ride itself, but El Toro and Kingda Ka. Once you boarded the train, you would buckle up your seatbelt and pull down the buzz bar, and once dispatched, you would ride over the ride's transfer table and make a left turn over to the lift and hear that distinctive screech that the ride had. If both sides were running, this is typically where the trash talking would begin about which side would win. As the train crested over the lift, the back rows would be subject to some very mild floater airtime. As you went down the drop, you would get a crazy head chopper effect with El Toro's appropriately named Rolling Thunder Hill and the brake run. The subsequent valley was super tight at first, really pushing you down into your seat, and unfortunately jackhammering pretty bad on both sides. The right side would take a shorter but super elongated hill that was void of any airtime, while the left side climbed up a much larger hill and gave a very small pop of airtime up front on the transition. However, the hill was way too large and elongated to give any sort of airtime afterwards. Next, the right side would climb up the large hill while the left side did the smaller. This gave the illusion that the right side was way ahead, but now the left side was catching up. The left side's smaller hill was a tad sharper and not as long, so it gave some okay floater airtime from what I remember. The right side's larger hill wasn't as intense as the left side's larger hill, so this element was sort of a dud. Up next, on the right side was a fan curve on the inside of the left side's turnaround. This was probably the most forceful moment of the ride on either side, giving super strong laterals around the entire turn. The left side did a larger flat turn around the right side's fan curve, and during this, the right side's train would get way ahead of the left side. Both sides then dropped down, and the right side would go over a larger hill, while the left side would traverse a smaller, faster-paced hill that would actually give some decent airtime. Both sides would then alternate going up and down hills. The left side went up, another hill that turned slightly, and the right side took a valley that turned slightly. Both gave some decent laterals. Both sides would then traverse another hill, with the right sides being slightly larger and drawn out. By now, because the left side had smaller, faster elements, if both trains dropped off the lift around the same time, they would have caught up to each other, and it would now just depend on the weight of each train on who would make the finish first. The rest of the ride was made up of 3 more bunny hills, with the left sides being slightly smaller, providing slightly stronger airtime, while the right side would give weak floater at best. The trains would then pass under 2 wooden posts, probably signifying the quote-unquote finish line of some sorts. There was one final turn to the brakes, providing strong laterals around the entire turn. Depending on how the trains dropped off the lift, the left side may have gotten completely in front of the right side, still a bit behind it, or right in line with each other. I remember as a kid, I would always count the posts as the finish line, while other friends would say it was when you hit the brakes. Either way, that was if it was even racing to begin with. Unfortunately, it was pretty rare for both sides to run together, at least it's in later years, since it required more staffing, or maybe one side was being worked on while the other wasn't. Typically the right side would be open if only one track was open, which is truly a shame since the left side was way better in my opinion. It provided more airtime, was faster paced, and was much smoother compared to the right side. The right side really only had the few moments of laterals going for it, and depending on how the ride was running, it could have just been completely uncomfortable. Around late 2012 and the entirety of 2013, there were rumors swirling around that Rolling Thunder would not be around for too much longer. The ride was getting rougher and, in result, less popular. I don't think I've ever actually waited more than 10 minutes for this ride, especially after my first time riding in 2012. Around this time, there were multiple days where numerous people would be observing the ride's structure. The rumor was that either the ride was getting a complete overhaul, or the newly popular Rocky Mountain construction was seeing if they could give it the Iron Horse treatment, or essentially turn it into an RMC hybrid with their signature iBox track. I personally remember being in line for El Toro and seeing guys who looked like they were with RMC taking a look at the structure. The rumor is that RMC did not want to work with the current structure of the ride, and would have wanted to do really expensive work in order for the ride to work that Six Flags at the time did not want to pay for. At this point, it was violently screeching and grinding through its valleys and turns. Well, actually it always did that, but it was much louder than usual. On August 29, 2013, it was officially announced that Rolling Thunder would be closed to make room for Zumanjaro Drop of Doom. The brand new drop tower announced the same exact day, and the ride closed not even 10 days later on September 8, 2013. The park began demolition during the 2013 off-season to make way for the queue line for Zumanjaro. Now, many people pointed out that Zumanjaro was not really affecting Rolling Thunder's existence. The queue line was simply just in its place. And in reality, I don't think Six Flags, well, Great Adventure for that matter, wanted to remove this ride simply for a queue line of a drop tower. And they definitely could have routed it a few different ways. However, I'm sure with the fact that RMC allegedly did not want to work on this ride, it was just made sense to remove Rolling Thunder and then use that same land. Rolling Thunder was really starting to show its age in its later years, as are many other William Cobb wooden coasters. And to this day, the only operating coasters from William Cobb are awkwardly paced, designed, and usually rough and borderline boring rides. Look at Monster at La Ronde, Judge or Scream at Six Flags Over Texas, Anaconda at Walligator, or Tornado at Adventureland. Just looking at these rides, they seem a tad underbuilt and designed in just a poor manner. So was Rolling Thunder doomed from the start? No, probably not. The park just really didn't want to maintain it after 34 years of having it, and especially since they allegedly just didn't maintain it that well in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And they figured they could use the space for something much better. Which is true, the plot of land this coaster sat on was huge. Now, once 2014 rolled around, the park opened up for the season, and Rolling Thunder was still there. A piece of the valley after the first drop from both sides was kept under El Toro's Rolling Thunder Hill. More than likely, they didn't want to take it apart by hand or couldn't get a crane in there or something like that, so they kept it. The park kept the trains around too, and there were rumors that the park would even create a memorial for the ride by placing the trains on the track along with some history around the ride. Unfortunately, this never happened. The track still sits there today, and it was essentially just reclaimed by nature. Sorry, had to throw that in there. Later in the 2014 season, Zumanjaro opened as the world's tallest drop tower and to large fanfare too. It was the type of ride that the park was missing, a record breaker, and a damn good ride too. It was honestly one of my favorites in the park, and at the time I considered it a more than worthy replacement for Rolling Thunder. However, as time went on, I realized that the park was missing something now. That really large coaster that was still good for families. Yeah, Great Adventure has an array of great family coasters and rides, but it still felt like something was missing. The next year, in 2015, the park placed El Diablo, a Larson Superloop, in the former location of Rolling Thunder Station. It was a very short-lived, not very liked ride, and was removed in 2018. While I actually did really like the ride, it was a great flat ride, and should have not been marketed as a coaster, and it definitely was not a worthy replacement of Rolling Thunder. Since then, not much has happened on Rolling Thunder's plot. There were some haunted mazes that took up the area of the final turn, but that was really about it. Even though Zumanjaro opened to large fanfare back in 2014, it definitely did not keep its popularity, and that was for a few different reasons. One, it was a fairly unreliable ride, and I'll talk more on this later. Two, it was also super far away from everything. You would have to walk to Kingda Ka and then basically walk down the entirety of Kingda Ka's launch track to get to this ride. It had a super long queue. I think it clocked around like a quarter of a mile long, maybe half a mile, and it was just a ridiculous walk to get to it. And honestly, a lot of guests didn't even know how to get to it. Zumanjaro was also destroying Kingda Ka's capacity every single day it ran. Even though Intamin designed the two to run together, the state of New Jersey did not like this idea, as they were afraid that loose articles or items could fall off of Kingda Ka's train and injure somebody on Zumanjaro. Even though there were awnings installed on the top of each Zumanjaro gondola, the state said that these were not long enough and would not stop any loose articles or items hitting guests on the ride. So for years, Kingda Ka and Zumanjaro were not allowed to run together. In Kingda Ka's Hydra Room, there was a key switch installed that would act as an interlock between the two rides. Basically, if one ride was on the tower, the other could not go. If Zumanjaro was on the tower, Kingda Ka was not able to launch until the car made it back down and the roofs would raise back up, blocking any items from falling into the station off of Kingda Ka. And vice versa too. If Kingda Ka was on the tower, Zumanjaro would not be able to dispatch. In 2021, the park installed longer awnings on each of Zumanjaro's gondolas, now allowing Kingda Ka and Zumanjaro to run together simultaneously. Despite this being installed, Zumanjaro now barely operated because, to be honest, it was a super unreliable ride in its later years. When it was able to operate, the park unfortunately cut it for staffing reasons because it really wasn't popular enough. Despite it being the world's tallest drop tower and having a massive height of 415 feet, and you could literally see the neighboring city of Philadelphia from it, for whatever reason, people just didn't feel like making the walk back here. It's a shame too, because now that the two could run together, it offered a super unique experience only really found on one other drop tower in the world at the time, which now that drop tower doesn't even have that experience anymore, which is Lex Luthor Drop of Doom at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Six Flags installed two of these large drop towers on two of their 400-foot coasters, the one being Zumanjaro and the other one being Lex Luthor Drop of Doom on Superman Escape from Krypton. The two would duel together as Superman would launch up and then drop down with Lex Luthor Drop of Doom, and now that Kingda Ka and Zumanjaro were able to do this, it allegedly offered a super amazing experience. I unfortunately never got to experience it though, because every time I tried, Kingda Ka would go down or Zumanjaro was not open. In late November 2024, that side of the park closed for the season as it normally does, and it was announced that Kingda Ka, along with Zumanjaro and Twister and the parachutes, would be removed to make way for a multi-record breaking launch coaster for 2026. As of right now, nothing sits on Rolling Thunder's plot. It really is a shame that nothing of its size replaced it, and I personally would have loved to see another wooden coaster go there, like a family coaster from Gravity Group or GCI. Obviously, it would be really cool if we got another large-scale racing wooden coaster, but to be honest, I would be happy with any size coaster over there. The future of the park and this plot of land is fairly unknown. Six Flags has a ton of land to work with now that Green Lantern, Parachutes, Twister, Ka, and Zumanjaro are all gone, and of course they could use Rolling Thunder's plot too. Will this unannounced ride take up the entire plot? Who knows, and this video isn't to speculate about it. However, it would be cool if Great Adventure did get another wooden coaster to complement El Toro.
So Rolling Thunder is actually a very important roller coaster to me. My mother was a long-term supervisor of it, and before she knew she was pregnant with me, that was the very first ride I ever rode. And I am happy to say that I was on one of the very last trains of Rolling Thunder on one of my knockoff Blackberries. I actually have a video of myself walking through the exit for the last time and going down the stairs. I still remember exactly how the queue was. That is a ride that I do miss very much. I think Great Adventure was a completely different park without it, and it was the start of the era that we went into for a lot of years, removing rides and not having adequate replacements, as good as Zumanjaro was. But I am happy to have been a small part of that ride's past, and I know that that spot will eventually hold a lot of good places in enthusiast hearts.
Hey guys, it's Confcom Studios here, and Rolling Thunder for me really was that first big step-up coaster. I rode that thing so many times before I was tall enough for El Toro, and I just have so many fond memories of all the rides I had on it and the kind of enthusiasm it gave me for the amusement industry, because quite frankly, that was one of the main coasters that wound up getting me so interested in the industry, and I will always thank Rolling Thunder for that.
I can remember the first time I rode Rolling Thunder very, very clearly. It was basically right after I got off from Superman, and I really didn't like Superman. I thought it was terrible. I wasn't really a fan of roller coasters, and it took my dad a lot of convincing to get me on Rolling Thunder. Rolling Thunder, however, instantly changed my mind. I don't know if it was the jank of the wood or the racing factor that it had or just the airtime. Everything about it just clicked so much more than when I rode Superman. And seeing El Toro right next to it, it really makes you want to work up to get onto that bigger coaster. I thought it was the perfect stepping stone coaster that the park needed.
So, my first experience with Rolling Thunder at Great Adventure was 1980, 1981. I was a senior in high school, and I had gone to the park with friends for the day. And I was not a fan of roller coasters. I'd only been on kiddie coasters when I was younger. I'm afraid of heights, so I was always trying to avoid roller coasters. They insisted that I go on. I kept telling them no. And we were on, other rides and doing other things during the day. And we were heading towards the coaster. And once again, I said, no, I'm not doing that. And they literally both picked me up, one in each arm, and they dragged me and carried me and trapped me in the line. And I went on the ride reluctantly, but once I was on it, I did enjoy it. It was a lot of fun, and I no longer had a fear of roller coasters. And I did start tackling other coasters as the years went on.
Thank you for watching, everybody. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and comment, and share it with your friends, whatever it might be. This took a long time to make, and I'm pretty happy with the way it came out. If you do want to see more of these, make sure you comment down below about it, and maybe a ride you might want to see in the series. I do plan on covering Great American Scream Machine and Lightning Loops, both from Great Adventure, so those rides I've already started writing scripts for. Also, thank you for everybody's videos I've used throughout the entire video. I'll make sure to put their YouTube channels or websites, whatever it might be, up on the screen and also in the description. And then also, thank you for everybody who did send in videos or was willing to send in videos. Fortunately, there were a few people who didn't get to send their video in, simply because I had to get this video out, but they'll be in the next few videos. So, once again, thank you guys so much. I really hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and comment, share with your friends, and I'll see you guys in the next video.